Hello, and welcome to season 5, episode 19 of the Fat Doctor podcast. I am your host, Dr. Asha Lamy, and let me tell you, I have been storing up, building up to this moment for some time. I've had this particular podcast in the books for some time, and I'm carrying around a lot of anger, rage, fury, righteous fury, I would argue, about this particular topic. And it sort of sits there in my gut. And every so often, I will read something in the papers or, I'll see something on some social media app that basically talks about the cost of being fat, the cost of being diabetic, the cost of being chronically ill, the cost of health. And it makes me mad. It makes me mad that we talk about health and wellness in the context of money. Like, I think that in of itself is so problematic. It's just so much about us as a society. And in particular, I get mad when we talk about the cost of, and I'm going to use a very stigmatizing word here, but for good reason, the cost of obesity. It's costing us money, don't you know? And so I'm going to be asking the question today, do we owe society a debt of health? Like, are we in debt to society? Is it our responsibility to be healthy or to remain healthy? And remember, we've already talked about like what is healthy and how do we define healthy? It's that in of itself is a problem. But assuming we know what healthy means, do we owe society a debt? Do we have a collective responsibility to remain healthy for as long as possible, to take whatever actions are necessary to remain healthy? And yes, of course, that might not work out, and we all accept that eventually we'll become unhealthy, but we need to postpone that for as long as possible, um, because we're all in this together. Is that true? Is that false? I don't know. Let's talk about it, shall we? Um, it's it's gonna be it's gonna be difficult for me to talk about this without talking about the O word, because when I think of health and I think of the cost of health to society, there is always someone who's going to bring up the cost of being fat to society, right? Like, it doesn't matter. We could be talking about anything. We could be talking about disability. We could be talking about, arthritis or antidepressants, or whatever. And I promise you, someone will bring up the cost of obesity. Obesity is costing, according to Google, obesity costs the United Kingdom an estimated £98 billion annually. 98, that's just short of 100 billion. Why not round up? When we get to these figures, why are we not rounding up? 98 billion. That is equivalent to nearly 4% of the country's GDP. And this is according to a study by the Tony Blair Institute. For those who don't know, Tony Blair is a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, an absolute cunt, if I may say so myself, and responsible for, amongst other things, international war crimes. But anyway, he has a foundation, an institute, not a foundation, an institute, that commissioned a report, and that's where the £98 billion annually comes from. And according to Google, this figure includes cost to the NHS, to social care, to lost productivity and reduced quality of life for individuals. I think it's time to take a look at this number. 98 billion. It feels very steep. It feels like a lot. And 4% of the GDP, my goodness, this is a lot. Let's take a look at this report, shall we? Join me, if you will. A content warning, just trigger warning. It's going to be offensive. You are going to be offended, but don't worry. Stick with me, because by the end of today, you will be feeling a lot better about this number. In fact, you will be armed with the knowledge of how to deal with anybody who dares quote that number in your face, because you'll know knowledge is power, right? So first and foremost, I want to talk about this report. Now, okay, I live in the UK. I'm talking about the UK-based report. There will be a similar one for the United States of America and probably every other country. You'll understand why in a moment. The report was commissioned and paid for through the Tony Blair Institute by a little company called Novo Nordisk, which, for those who don't know, is a global pharmaceutical company that specializes in diabetes medication and weight loss treatments, in particular Ozempic and Wegovy. Now, Novo Nordisk commissioned this report, apparently, according to the report, to provide an updated, independent estimation of the full economic cost of obesity in the UK. Why? Because the previously widely referenced figure of 27 billion was based on a 2000 report and likely outdated given the increasing prevalence of obesity. You see, Novo Nordisk came along for absolutely no reason whatsoever and said, oh, 27 billion, that just feels a bit low. Feels a bit low to us. We think there's probably more to it than that. So we'll commission a report and and it just happened to be in 2021. And that just happened to be the same time as when the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which is the equivalent of the FDA, or they make decisions about whether or not to approve certain drugs. And the particular drug we're talking about here is Wegovy for weight loss, semaglutide for weight loss. And they commissioned this report in time for that review, so that when they were talking to our equivalent of the FDA, when they were talking to NICE, they could say it's cost effective, because of course we have a nationalized health service. So in order for a drug to be approved, it has to be cost effective. And so they commissioned a report so that they could prove it was cost effective. Because if we know how much being fat is costing, and then we can say, but our drug will reduce that by this much, then we can talk about the actual cost effectiveness. Great, right? And then, 27 billion was low. I'm not sure that the prevalence of quote unquote obesity has gone up that much since 2007 to account for the difference between 27 and 98 billion. It's just, because that's more than triple. There must be more to it than that, right? It's almost quadrupled. Let's break it down. I think we need to break it down. Let's break it down. That's the only way to do it, right? So take a closer look at the report. Bearing in mind now where it comes from. So actually what's really interesting, the report came out in 2022, and in 2023, a different organization sort of updated it. But looking at the report, it hasn't really changed since 2022, is what I'm trying to say. Looking at the report, they separated it into three kind of tiers, if you will. There were the individual costs. And that is basically a reduction in longevity and quality of life, how long you live and the quality of your life from being fat. So we calculated that. And they separated it into being obese, again, hate the word, but that's BMI of over 30, and being overweight, that's having a BMI between 25 and 30. And so the individual cost was really high amongst the quote unquote obese. That was 54 billion pounds, but not from being overweight. That was only 9 billion. So you add those two together and you get 63 billion. 63 billion for the individual costs. That's the cost to individuals, right? It's not actually a cost to society. Then there's the NHS costs. As I said, the National Health Service is funded by the taxpayer. It's a nationalised service. So it's funded by taxes. And so one could argue that that's a sort of society-based cost. And the cost from being obese was 11 billion, and from being overweight was 8 billion. So together that's 19 billion. That's almost 20 billion on the NHS alone. Once upon a time, it was 27 billion for just all of society. Now it's just 20 billion almost just for the NHS. And then there are the wider society costs. So what are the wider society costs? Well, the cost of inactivity in work, social care, things like that. So the cost from obesity is 9 billion, from being overweight 6 billion. You put those together and somehow you end up with 16 billion. This is not making sense. The math is not mathing, but I imagine that they were doing some rounding up and rounding down and whatever. Anyway, you do the math, it works out as 98 billion. Trust them. And it's a sort of 3-to-1 ratio, 3 in the obesity section versus 1 to the overweight section, thus proving that the fatter you are, the more you cost. All right then, that's the numbers. Let's break it down. So to begin with, let's talk about the individual. No, I'm not starting with individual costs. Am I starting with individual costs? No, I am not. I'm starting with the cost to the NHS. I do beg your pardon. I've written notes because obviously I had to. I'm starting with the cost to the NHS, the cost to the healthcare service, people. How did they work it out? Well, they had to use something called a population attributable factor. You might be asking, what the fuck is that? That's what I was asking. I had to ask AI. So a PAF is basically ask the question, what percentage of this disease in the population would be eliminated if we completely eliminated obesity? Right? If we got rid of obesity, what percentage of the disease in the population would be eliminated? And you might be thinking, how the fuck can we work that out? And that is a very good question. It is, because of course it assumes that obesity is the only cause for this particular disease, no, I shouldn't say not the only cause. It assumes that obesity is causally related to the disease. So if we say, look at a disease like diabetes, and we say 33% of it would be completely eliminated if we got rid of obesity, then that you're saying that that obesity causes diabetes, right? That's what you're saying, which is not true. There's no evidence for that. Absolutely none. In fact, here's the thing: we're assuming in this calculation that obesity is causally related to any disease, which of course, once again, there is no evidence to prove that. We have never been able to prove causality. In fact, there's a ton of evidence that suggests otherwise, that suggests no, there is no causality there. You're making that up. In fact, all of the sort of diseases that we associate with being fat, we could instead of blaming the fat, we could just as equally blame the weight stigma or the weight cycling or any other number of causes. So already here we have a problem. We've said 20 billion, and we've never actually been able to prove that obesity causes anything. The diseases they included type 2 diabetes, obviously, high blood pressure, myocardial infarction, colon cancer, angina, gallbladder disease. Gallbladder, that really pisses me off because one of the biggest causes of gallstones is fucking weight loss. But anyway, don't allow. I told you there was righteous fury. Ovarian cancer, musculoskeletal disorders, stroke, and sleep apnea. Yeah, all of those things, which we all know. I have done actual podcast episodes. I have done masterclasses on a number of these conditions. I'm going to have to do masterclasses on the rest of them now. I'm about to do one on gallbladder disease, on gallstones. And let me tell you that I have done deep dives into the research. I've looked at the guidelines. I have looked at every paper ever written that sort of claims to prove that being fat causes the disease, and they fail every single time. There is no one has ever been able to prove causality and for any of these conditions, and yet they also they also did a separate calculation for antidepressant use. We'll get to that in a moment. Oh, as a fat person on antidepressants, this is making me mad. Is it making you mad? Are you feeling mad? Are you feeling rage right now? Are you feeling it bubbling up? Don't worry. Stick with me. Stick with me, people. It's going to be okay. So listen, if in fact being fat does not cause any of these diseases, but is merely correlated to them, then we have a problem. Number one, we're attributing a cost to being fat when there isn't a cost or that we can prove. So there's an overestimation of the cost. There are also all of the other confounding variables that we forget about, like socioeconomic factors, social deprivation, healthcare access, systemic oppression, all of those things might be factoring in, making it a little bit difficult to make guess and estimation. How cold hard facts do not take any of these, or cold hard figures, not facts, cold hard figures don't take any of this stuff into consideration. And then there is something called reverse causality, folks. Please remember this word, reverse causality. Some conditions actually cause weight gain rather than the other way around. Diabetes is a very classic example of that. Insulin resistance causes weight gain. Weight gain does not cause insulin resistance. So, like, that fucks up the calculation as well, doesn't it? All of a sudden. We have a problem. And then and then and then there's the whole idea about antidepressant use. Oh, there's also a bit in this report about COVID-19, but I haven't even gone there because I'm just like, it's too triggering. I can't. But the antidepressants I have included in this analysis of the report, and it makes me really quite sick. It really makes me sick. Because they've basically done a calculation with, like, this is the cost of antidepressants. This is the cost of antidepressants that we can relink to obesity. And therefore, this is how much money we'll be saving if we got rid of obesity. And let me tell you why that is a problem. Number one, you're assuming that being fat causes depression. Rather than the fact that perhaps depression may cause weight gain, and or there might be some other factors that influence both the rates of depression and the rates of fatness. There's that. There's no causal. And then you're assuming, making a really big fucking assumption, that if we got rid of fatness, we no longer need to take antidepressants. If I was suddenly thin, I'd no longer need antidepressants. Has that been your reality, folks? When you've gone on a diet, when you've lost weight, have you needed to stop your antidepressants? Can't say that I have. In fact, I felt like real shit. My mood certainly wasn't doing great when I went on a diet. That's in fact, depression is often the thing that kind of like is my limiting factor when I've tried weight loss in the past. Like I got to a point where the depression was so bad that I stopped. So yeah, I'm not sure that's true. And then, of course, there is an assumption, and I think this is the bit that makes me so mad, that depression in fat people is somehow different to depression in thin people. I mean, we can have a conversation about that, how it does differ, because of the way that society treats fat depressed people versus thin depressed people. But being fat doesn't fundamentally change how depression kind of impacts us in our body. It's disgusting to assume that it does. There's levels of ableism there that I can't even begin to fathom. So that's the cost to the NHS. There was COVID-19, as I said, it didn't include it. I can get through this. And then, as I said, that was the cost to the NHS. Then there was the individual costs. And I'd like to remind you that when it came down to it, the individual cost was 74 out of the 98 billion. The individual cost, in other words, how it's impacting you and I, me, us. Um, so how do they measure the individual cost? How do you measure the cost of being fat? They've done it. Don't worry, the Tony Blair Institute has done it for you. You can relax. You can take it easy. So they measure that using something called a QALY, a quality adjusted life year. Feel free to Google it. So basically what this does is it combines quantity and quality of life by assigning, and get this, 1 year of perfect health with a value of 1. Perfect health, folks, that's a value of 1. And I think dead is a value of 0. And everything in between is a spectrum, if you will, of health. Perfect health. Someone remind me what perfect health is again? Like I can't remember. We defined it, right? No, hang on. No, we didn't. That's because perfect health is kind of hard to define because we can't define health in the first place. No, that's right. No, that's hmm. Hmm. Already there seems to be a problem. Even though we're dealing with ones and zeros, it's already a problem. So the idea is that we can come up with a number. Just a QALY, a number. And how do we then sort of attribute a financial number? Like, how do we go from a QALY, which is just a number, which even in of itself is flawed because it's based on the idea that such a thing as perfect health, and we can define that and we can give it a number 1, and everything else is less than 1. So that in itself is flawed. But then how do we take the QALY and attribute an actual monetary value to 1 year of perfect, quote unquote, perfect health? What is the value of that? How do we work that out, folks? Well, there are lots of ways to do it. First of all, we could ask people, what would you be willing to pay to gain an additional year of perfect health? How much money? Which is really crazy, isn't it? Like the idea of just asking people, and just out of curiosity, how much would you be willing to pay? I'm curious what that number is. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'd love it if you stuck it in the comments. Just give me a number, the number of money you'd be willing to pay, the amount of money you'd be willing to pay to gain an additional year of perfect health, assuming you know what you can define perfect health for yourself. So that's one thing we can do. We can estimate a person's economic contribution, how much people put into society, and therefore on average, and therefore how much an extra year of their perfect health would be worth. We could do that. That would assume that that's only for people who work. because people who don't work are not valued citizens, so we don't include those in our calculation, just in case you're wondering. Um, we could observe how much people are willing to accept as compensation for a risky job. That's one way of doing it, right? Like how much, like what do I have to pay you to do a job that may threaten your life? How much extra do I have to pay you? And it's a shockingly low number, by the way. And then we can also look at like health risks, what people are willing to do, what people are willing um to pay to do things that would actually put their life in danger. We can all actually observe those choices. We can do a number of things to basically put a number on it. And I want you to know that the NHS, well, and by the NHS I mean the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, says a quail is worth roughly between 20 and 30,000 per year, roughly. And the government, the government, Her Majesty's, I'm sorry, His Majesty's government, says it's about 66,000. Oh, it was 2, 3 years ago, £66,000 per. In case you were wondering, like you can decide how much a year of perfect health is worth to you, but according to our government, it's worth £66,000. You're welcome. So then we can we calculate the quality and then we just do a simple mathematical equation and we come up with what was it? 54 billion. Um, if you're fat, if you're obese, but if you're overweight, it's only 9 billion. It's only nine. It's different. Um, oh my God. Yeah. So it's a bit controversial, isn't it? It's a bit controversial. How do we reduce human experience to a monetary figure? How do we live in a world where that is possible? That's what I want to know. And are we not just commodifying human life? Is that just not what we're doing? Health, we've given it a number. Um, and I guess I really want to ask the question, are all lives valued equally under this system? If it's all about a person's economic contribution, how much someone is willing to pay. If you have less money, you are willing to pay less money because you have less money. I'm sure Elon Musk would pay a fuckload more for an extra year of health than I would. I don't think in those types of figures. And when it comes down to kind of sort of being a bit objective about it, it's inevitable that people who are already oppressed by society are going to be excluded from these equations, are going to be penalized by these equations. It goes without saying, right? Just the idea that people can put a number on the quality of life. Who gets to do that? Who gets to decide? I really want to ask the government, like, how did you come up with this? How dare you? It's not how did you, it's how dare you come up with that number? Who the fuck do you think you are to tell me what my life, what my health is worth? Honestly, the caucasity of it. Oh, outrageous. And then don't forget, I talked about there was the NHS cost, the healthcare cost to healthcare services. There was the individual cost, and then there's the wider society cost. And this is what the Dubros just love to talk about, isn't it? Oh yeah, yeah. A number of sick pay days. Like you just calling in sick all the time. You're just not productive. That's my Dubro accent impression. It's all about productivity, isn't it? Because that's how we define human worth nowadays in society. How productive are you? How many days are you taking off work sick? God forbid you don't have a job. Or worse still, you're too sick to work. Disabled. Ooh, what are you? You are lower than low. You are useless. You are nothing in society. This is just all bringing back. One of the reasons I'm very angry is that I try not to think about my father at all. Sperm donor, useless, abusive, narcissistic dickhole that he is. Um, but he has come up in conversation recently. My Daily Mail Reform voting father. No, I don't know that he. I know he reads the Daily Mail. I don't know that he votes for the Reform Party. I'm assuming he does. I'm assuming that he worships the Elon Musks and Donald Trumps of this world because that's the kind of person he is. I know that he hates immigrants. which is funny because he's an immigrant, right? Like, like he is an immigrant. He immigrated here in 1978. English isn't his first language, but he hates immigrants and he hates sick people and he hates anybody on benefits because they're the scum of the earth. And he thinks his life has been really hard. So had it so hard. Fucking boomer. Anyway, so this is bringing up a lot of anger and aggression towards my father as well. I just thought I'd put that in there because why should I not share that with all of you? He's a dick. There's a reason I haven't spoken to him in many, many years and will never ever speak to him again. But anyway, yeah, people, I can imagine what my father has to say about people who take days off work. He never took a day off work. He never did anything for his family and treated his wife like a slave, but he never took a day off work. And then, of course, social care again, like, oh, social care, just the idea of social care upsets some people. Why should we have to look after people and members of society that are struggling to look after themselves? Why is that our responsibility? That's what they say. And then the dude bros will tell you shit that is absolutely untrue. Like being fat and the cost of obesity is increasing our health insurance premiums. It's affecting all of our health insurance premiums. The fuck it is. I'll tell you who's affecting your health insurance premiums. The CEOs of health insurance companies. That's the people you should be worried about. Not fat people. They're not doing anything to your health insurance premiums because as you can see, these calculations are absolute bullshit. They do not make sense. There is no value. And really the only reason we create these calculations is so that companies such as Novo Nordisk can make some money, right? Because there's no other purpose to this. Why? What's the purpose? To sell something. Yeah, and that's what we need to remember. So I had this idea, right? I had this idea. It was like a thought experiment. And I asked AI, I said, hey, I use Claude. Claude and I just like having a first name for my AI. So I asked Claude, I said, Claude, if I were to commission a report into the cost of being male to the United Kingdom using similar methodology, sorry, as they did for this Tony Blair Institute report, if I were to do that, what would it find? And not ChatGPT, Claude said, "Ooh, hey, interesting question. That's really interesting. Let me tell you, first of all, it would find very striking results. Number one, when we look at the quality of the individual quality of life, so individual costs, it would find substantial quality losses because men in the UK live approximately 3 to 4 years less than the average woman. And as I'm saying man and woman and male and female, acknowledging that the gender binary is bullshit, acknowledging that gender and sex have nothing to do with each other, and acknowledging that there is a whole entire group of people who are missing from this equation. But I'm going to put all of that to one side because this is a thought experiment and there's only so many plates I can spin at the same time. So when I talk about being a man, that's just a slip of the tongue. And when I talk about male and female, I'm sorry, intersex people, I apologize for excluding you from this thought process, but quite frankly, I'm just not that smart. So men in the UK live approximately 3 to 4 years less than women on average. So if we use the same 66,780 Quayle valuation, it will translate to a massive cost because 50% of the UK is male. And that's 4 years, 66,000. You can do the math, right? There you go. There you go. And what about the cost to the NHS, to healthcare? Well, remember PAFs, PAFs, population attributable factors, when we basically ask ourselves what percentage of this disease in the population would be eliminated if we got rid of males? In this case, what percentage would be? Well, let me tell you, cardiovascular disease is much more common in males, earlier onset, higher severity, many cancers, including lung, colorectal, liver, bladder cancers, accidental injuries and deaths, much higher in males than in females, suicide, approximately 3 times higher in males than females. So there you go. If you just wanted to dig down and look at population attributable factors and calculate the cost of being male to the NHS, well, it would be quite substantial, wouldn't it? Again, a reminder, fat people make up what 25-30% of the UK, but males make up 50% of the UK, so significantly higher costs. There'd be increased healthcare utilization costs because men use the healthcare system more than males use more than females. There would be productivity impacts, right? because of how many days of work males are missing and the impact of social care, etc., etc. And also, we have to remember the fact behavioral factors, when it comes down to it, there are higher rates of risk-taking behaviors in males, substance use, delaying healthcare, all of these things higher in males than females. So if I were to use the same methodology that the Tony Blair Institute, if I was to commission this report, I would find that the cost of being male is probably far exceeds the 98 billion a year. And you might say, but Asha, I can't help being male. Yeah, but actually the parallels are much, much closer than we'd like to think and makes us comfortable. Because like being fat, like obesity, being male has some modifiable components. Risk-taking behavior, not accessing healthcare quick enough, right? Risk-taking. It's the same. There's some modifiable factors. However, when it comes down to it, the majority is non-modifiable. These are biological, hormonal, genetic, DNA factors that we cannot control. So actually, there is actually a lot of similarities between being male and being obese. I hate using that word. Fat. Again, the methodology is going to blur correlation and causation. We can't say for sure that being a man is the cause of your heart attack. Come on, dude, you can't say that. But no more than we can say that being fat is the cause for your heart attack. Like there's, the lines between correlation and causation are blurred either way. And then, like, how would you feel, dude bros, if I commissioned this report and said to you, actually, you're costing us a lot of money. What if we got rid of you? What if we just eliminated you from the equation? Just got rid of males, just like we're getting rid of obesity. Just found a drug. What? Okay, let's just sort of take my thought experiment and let's just expand on it. We don't need that many males to keep the population afloat, right? Because at the end of the day, we need females. Females are the ones that gestate, incubate, and they have the oven for the bun, as it were. Males just produce the ingredients, and so we therefore need fewer males to maintain our birth rates. Right? You just share them around, is what I'm trying to say, basically. So what if I were to discover a drug or create a drug that you could give to people prior to conception that would basically reduce your chances of conceiving a male by like 90%? So, we won't completely eradicate males, or maybe it reduced it by 100%. So we could only conceive females, and then we allowed a certain number of males to be born, but we monitored that. Like we absolutely took a whole, like we controlled how many males we were allowed to be born in society. And so we were predominantly a female society. And that would reduce healthcare costs massively, wouldn't it? So why aren't we doing that? Just out of curiosity. Why are we not doing that? Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I guess this thought experiment, perhaps exposes some of the limitations of how we frame health economics when we calculate the cost of being fat, the cost of being disabled. Why don't we calculate the cost of being male? Because it would just be so good to calculate the cost of being male. Essentially, what we're doing is we're comparing an idealized, unattainable alternative, right? An alternative reality in which we could just completely eradicate fatness from off the face of the earth, as some would love to do. I mean, but, there are people out there who want to get rid of all immigrants. They want to get rid of all sick people, all disabled people. Like, there are people out there who genuinely think society will be a better place if we didn't have these groups of people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there is a word to describe the people who think this, and that is cunt. They are cunts. If you don't like that word, I make no excuses. There is no other word in the English language that quite, maybe motherfucker does. I don't know. You can use one or the other, but they are the scum of the earth. They are dog shit. They are disgusting for even thinking that we should be eradicating any group from society in order to better society. But they exist. Eugenicists, fascists, Nazis, you can call them whatever you want. I'll stick with cunt. It just feels good off the tip of the tongue. Mwah. Anyway, there are people out there who think that way, but I just wondered what would happen if we turned the tables and just made it about males. Um, the last thing I want to do before I come to a close is actually calculate the cost of calculating the cost. Because this is the thing, isn't it? We owe society a debt of health, and so what we're going to do, that's the theory. We owe society a debt of health. We're going to calculate just how much we owe. We are going to calculate the bill. And here it is, the bill to the United Kingdom, fat people like myself, 98 billion, please, per year. That's the bill for being fat. So I want to know, what is the cost of calculating that cost? And I've thought about it, and I think that perhaps I haven't developed it as much as I ought to, but think of the stigma it causes. This calculation is responsible for all the stigma that we're experiencing, and we all know how stigma impacts people, right? Think about the denied healthcare. We are using this number, these risks that we're calculating, this implied causality to deny people healthcare. It's fucking with people's insurance premiums. This is giving insurance companies the excuse to charge fat people higher premiums. We're putting a financial burden on fat people by asking them to pay for weight loss. We're excluding fat people from society. And I say fat people because I'm thinking about fat people, because I'm always thinking about fat people, but you could replace that with disabled people. You can replace that with black people. You can replace that with any marginalized group, oppressed group. When we calculate the cost of individuals, groups of people to society, we are intentionally stigmatizing them. We are intentionally excluding them from a society. We are intentionally profiting off them. That's the cost of calculating the cost. So my question was, do we owe society a debt of health? I think you know where I stand on this. I mean, I could have just gone no and ended the podcast, but hopefully you found my thought experiment useful. Hopefully you found my analysis of this disgusting paper useful. Also, just knowing the origin story, just knowing that it was commissioned by Novo Nordisk should give it away, really, in time for the nice approval of Wegovy. Just puts everything into perspective. So we've come to the everything you've been told about weight loss is a lie portion of the podcast. And today I am talking about a paper by Stevens and co. Adult and childhood weight influence, body image and depression. Sorry, I just said that wrong. Adults and childhood weight influence body image and depression through weight stigmatization. That is the title of the article. It's from the Journal of Health, 2017. So this study looked at how weight stigma, which they defined as being judged or treated badly because of your weight, might explain the link between body mass index in childhood and adulthood, depression, and body dissatisfaction. So they were looking at these three things: your weight, body mass index, your levels of depression, and body satisfaction. And they were looking at your weight in childhood and your weight in adulthood. It was 299 female university students, males not accepted. Part of my thought experiment, if you will. Imagine a society where they didn't exist anymore. The average age was 20.5. The average BMI was 23.3. Limitations already to the study. It was done on thin women, most of whom were white. But still, it's a study, and studies are studies, and so we need to take these limitations into mind and take that into consideration as we're looking through the researchers. So they basically tested whether lifetime experience of weight stigma acted as a mediator for depression and for being fat. So in other words, whether stigma was the reason why people with higher BMI felt more depressed and or dissatisfied with their bodies. And they found that weight stigma explained the link between BMI and body dissatisfaction, the link between BMI and depression, and the link between being a fat child and depression. In fact, the model they used explained 45% of the variation in depression and 28% in the variation in body dissatisfaction. Do you know, as I'm reading this, I'm wondering if I've done this study before. Maybe I did it for a course. It's just I'm having a deja vu moment. If I've already covered this study in a previous podcast episode, look, what can I tell you? It's hormones. I forget shit. But yeah, fascinating stuff, right? So what it found was weight stigma was was actually responsible for about almost 50% of the variation in depression, which kind of takes us back to the antidepressant thing, right? That Novo Nordisk, and I tell you, Novo Nordisk is obsessed with mental health at the moment. I have noticed they're spending an awful lot of money on research that involves psychiatry, which is weird because they don't make any mental health drugs. They don't make sort of psychiatric drugs. So you got to wonder, why is Novo Nordisk so like obsessed? Why are they spending millions and millions and millions on organizations, on doctors, on research into mental health? And I suspect it has something about to do with the fact that they are using the link between depression and being fat as a means of pushing weight loss. But this study directly kind of speaks to that, because what it's saying is actually the real issue here is the weight stigma. So instead of eradicating the weight, we can just eradicate the weight stigma. And that's actually much easier than eradicating the weight, because you see, it's impossible to eradicate the weight. We know that weight loss is unsustainable. We've known that for a very long time, and Novo Nordisk drug isn't making a difference to that. It just helps you lose weight for a period of time. It doesn't help you lose weight forever, and it has all sorts of risks associated with it. So eradicating fatness is not really possible. Eradicating weight stigma is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible to do that. In fact, I would argue it's quite easy and very cost effective. It's quite cheap to eradicate weight stigma. It's not going to cost much. In fact, for some people, it's not going to cost anything at all. So if you want to get down to the costs, this study is a really important study, isn't it? Weight stigma has a very powerful negative effect on mental health, people, and the study really supports that. And so reducing weight stigma improves body dissatisfaction on body image. It also reduces depression, almost certainly more than actually focusing on weight itself. So next time somebody says to you, "Oh, I see you're depressed. Maybe you should consider losing weight," you can say, "Actually, there's a study from 2017 that disproves this, that it would be much better, much more effective, much more useful and helpful for me, for society to address weight stigma than for me to lose weight. So it's a you problem, not a me problem. Thank you very much." Um, and finally, the Ask Me Anything portion of the Fat Doctor podcast. I have been saving up this question for this episode, and you'll see why shortly. Essentially, this is part of a conversation I was having with somebody, so I don't have the actual written question. It was a verbal question that was asked. Basically, essentially, in a nutshell, my brother is an asshole. She didn't say that. She said, "My brother is constantly reminding me that being fat and disabled," she's fat and she has chronic pain, "being fat and disabled is a drain to society," there, and doesn't necessarily say that to her. It doesn't say you're a drain to society. He's just constantly bringing up the fact that people who are fat and people who are disabled are a drain to society. And so she was basically asking me, what can I tell him to shut him up? So my first option, because you mentioned it was your brother, was to say, yeah, being male is a much bigger drain to society. Just so you know. The biggest drain to society, one of the biggest drains you can say, is being male. Much bigger drain than being fat. Um, Another thing you can say is shut the fuck up. That's another thing you can say. I'm not having this conversation with you. And I think that that is really the main message of this podcast episode. Do we owe society a debt of health? The fuck we do. We do not owe society a debt of health. Absolutely fucking not. I have autonomy. And whilst I do believe that to a degree, we have a responsibility as a collective, as a society, as a community to look out for each other, to support one another. You have to support me before I'm going to start supporting you. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one that's being oppressed. I'm the one that's being badly treated. Now, if you make healthcare access equal, not equal, equitable, if you stop stigmatizing me, if you create a world in which I am no longer punished for being fat, then I tell you what, then I will agree with you. Then I will say, you make a fair point. We do, in a utopian society, probably, almost certainly, have a collective responsibility, have a responsibility to the collective, maybe. But not in this society. not in this society, with where thin, white, cisgender, heterosexual, non-disabled, wealthy men essentially are making decisions that affect all of society. No, I don't know, you fuck all until you get rid of them. You do that, then we'll talk. Get back to me. I'll hold this space here for us. I think I might turn the flip the coin, turn it back around to the brother and be like, and what are you doing that's contributing to society? How are you helping people in society? How are you addressing economic inequality, injustice? You list however many you want, like have a list of things. What are you doing? Drain to society. Fucking what? You think that you can calculate how much you're worth? Go ahead and calculate it. And then I will calculate how much I'm worth, and I will prove that I'm worth more than you. That's what I would say to my asshole brother. If I had an asshole brother, thank God I don't. All right, this was a very ragey podcast. I knew it was going to be a ragey podcast. I make no apologies for my ragey podcast. I warned you at the beginning it was going to be somewhat triggering and that I was going to be very angry. I am filled with anger, filled with sweary words, filled with righteous fury towards the motherfuckers that had the audacity to calculate how much I am worth, how much my life and my health is worth. Fuck you, Tony Blair. Fuck you, Novo Nordisk. Fuck you, Google, for telling me this in the first place. Fuck everybody who ever quotes this fucking statistic. And also, let it be known that the sole purpose of creating this report was so that Novo Nordisk made money. More than 98 billion. Much more than 98 billion. So, thank you for listening in. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I hope you'll come back next week and you aren't too put off. I will have a new made up fictional person for you to enjoy. For those of you who like my podcasts on, we've done all sorts of people so far. Who was last month? Can't remember. Can't remember the name. Charlie? Was it Charlie last time? Don't know. I'll have a new one for you. And what else do you need to know? Weight Inclusive Wednesdays. Are you coming to Weight Inclusive Wednesdays? That's for members of all people who are part of my memberships, but you can join if you want to join and you're not part of my memberships. You can join as well. Are you reading my newsletters? I'm only sending one a week. Have a look through. They're full of useful information. And we just had our first coffee and catch up. We had it a couple of weeks ago. That's going to be a monthly thing now. And this is for all of the community. You don't have to be a member of any of my, be a member of my memberships. You don't have to be. You don't have to pay. This is completely free. It is something that you have to register for. I'm trying to create a safe space away from social media. It is why I'm not doing IG lives anymore. It's why I don't trust social media. We're living in 2025, people. I'm not putting my shit out there anymore. If you want to come and spend some time with me, I absolutely encourage you to do so, but we're going to do it in a safe space. We're going to be in a safe space where no one is watching. So it's absolutely free to come. I'm hosting it on Zoom at the moment because that feels relatively safe. We'll see. Watch the space. But for now, it's a Zoom call once a month, last Wednesday of the month at 5 p.m. UK time. Anyone can register. I send a link out. It's in my newsletter. I put it on my social media feed. I send an email. And so all you need to do is register and come be part of just a safe space. I'm trying to hold space for community. That's all I'm trying to do. It's just be like, I want... those of you who can and want to be there, who have the time and the energy to spare and just want to meet other like-minded people, I'd love to have you there. So it's called Coffee and a Catch Up. And it's on the last Wednesday of every month. So there's Weight Inclusive Wednesdays, which is the second Wednesday of the month, which is more kind of a bit more teaching. I mean, it's mainly conversation, but we'll have topics and thoughts, and perhaps we'll be looking at some of the issues that came up in the membership programs. And then there's kind of coffee and catch up, which is just coffee and a catch up. So hopefully you can join me. I love the fact that Zoom wrote that as coffee and ketchup, not catch up. They don't know what a catch up is. I will see you next week, or I will be here next week, and you can join me or not, depending on how you feel. Take care. Have a great week.